Hey everyone, it's Greebs here from One Last Try. I'm here with Cook and Bino. We're here for our post-medium discussion. This is where we're going to recap. We're not going to recap. We're going to talk about some of our thoughts, some of our reviews, some of our questions that we have from our playthrough from the medium. If you haven't seen it yet, you can watch all 11 episodes. The last episode was only a 10-minute one. We thought that it would go a little longer, but all of a sudden the story was ending, but it was exactly what we needed because it gives us an opportunity to start talking about it, start answering questions, start talking about questions that have no answers, and then we can even start thinking about what's going to happen from a sequel perspective. So we're going to dive right in. We're not going to recap the game at all. If you want some of that, you can preview some of our previous episodes. There were 11, and instead we're just going to talk about what we thought and what our general ideas were of the game. So we're going to start with talking about some of the things we didn't understand. There were a lot of different story components to unravel within the game. But as a result, there are also some things that we didn't understand or didn't pick up along the way. And of course, if you have any thoughts on those, please feel free to leave comments down below because we could definitely use some extra insight on some of these, I think. So, Bino, what kind of things didn't you understand in this plot or this story?
Well, that's a good question. The big one that jumps out to me is how did the Maw finally get out? How did he break out of, or how did Lily break out of that bunker and release the Maw to wreak havoc on the people of the Neva Resort? That question wasn't really answered in the game, and I'm not 100% sure if that was just me not paying attention to something, or did they fail to explain that. Um, Definitely, my biggest question is how exactly did the Maw get out and result in the death of all of those people? Because just I didn't see that in the game.
I think didn't Lily release the mod during the fire to save them? I thought that was what the trade-off was.
And I was going to ask, sort of, where does the timeline sort of fit on the Maw's birth in quotation marks? So there's a fire, Lily's in it, she makes this pact with the Maw. Now, was it always living inside her and that was just sort of the release,
That was
or
my
was it
understanding was
not in
that
her that sort of created it in her, and then as a result of that she had it inside her since that point, and then Thomas, recognizing this, had to throw her in her bunker, but it was still contained within her. And then some point after that, it was massacred. So I don't know. There's definitely some timeline questions in there. Go ahead, Bino. Sorry.
Yeah, my understanding was that the fire happened prior to all of the events at the Neva Resort, because um, if there's no other opportunity for the Maw to have gotten out after the fire, it was the fire happened. The Maw was birthed inside of Lily to keep her and Marianne alive because of that trade that she made, and then Thomas understood that something bad was going to happen and tried to keep her contained, but couldn't, and that's when she got out, and all havoc was released onto the Neva Resort. It very well could have been that this all happened prior to the fire happening, but then there would have been evidence of Marianne being in the Neva Resort, and I don't think any of that was uncovered. It made it look like Marianne was already gone, and Lily was the only one there. Especially with the way that Richard appeared to target Marianne, or to target Lily. Sorry, that he had no idea that Marianne existed, and I don't think that would have been the case had Lily released the Maw prior to the fire.
Yeah, I think my impression was that she released it or let it go, let it free during the fire to save both of them. And then that's kind of when it was loose and started to be able to, I guess, possess people, because it was moving around different people within the Neva Resort, right?
That's what we're led to believe. Maybe the Maw got out and eventually killed everybody and came back to get Lily, or came back to maybe it killed everybody while Lily was in captivity.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
I agree. It's not super clear because that's one of the
Yep.
things that I wasn't sure about either was like when in the timeline was the fire versus the Neva Resort
Yep.
and how far away it was. Was the Neva Resort built like around the same time or was it like well in the future?
Yeah.
And we got a lot of indicators within the game about some of the timelines. Like I remember there was a sign that said in 1983 this restoration project is going to happen, and 1999 is when the game actually happens. And then there are also some hints dropped about the 1960s. I seem to recall with the Neva Resort opening, and then of course the storyline with Richard and his childhood looks like it happens probably in the 40s around World War II era. And so, I mean, there's definitely some hints. I think if you probably go through the game and really pay attention to dates and you have an idea of what's going on already in the game, that you don't need to pay attention to other aspects, you can probably make sense of it. But I think for us, because this is our first time playing through it, we didn't really know when we were focusing more, I think, on relationships necessarily than the timeline. We didn't really know
Who
how that
are
was
these
gonna,
people, not
Yeah.
when are
exactly
these people?
how do they connect rather than when do they connect and all that. So
Yep.
I mean, you can't start establishing timelines if you don't know how these people connect, because you don't know that Thomas and Lily and Marianne are even related. So you're not trying to piece those pieces together. And
Yep.
it even throws us for a loop in the second last episode that we filmed, where we find out that she is sitting there with Spirit Thomas, smoking a cigarette and telling him all the events that led up to that. So I mean, we then move that, I guess, is the present when the game actually starts. It then goes back recounting all those events to that point, and then the last half hour of the game is what happens after that point. So I mean, it certainly plays with the timeline a lot. But I mean, I don't think that question really affects the enjoyment of it. It's just sort of things that linger in our head and say, hey, they talked about this massacre a lot, but
Yep.
what exactly was it?
Yeah, exactly. Another unanswered question that I'm pondering at the end of the game is what the heck happened to real life Thomas? How did he make that phone call to Marianne at the start of the game? And I understand that Spirit Thomas was locked away by Henry's monster. That could have severed the connection or weakened the connection between Spirit Thomas and real life Thomas. But it was very interesting when Spirit Thomas said that he hadn't sensed real Thomas in a while, and that maybe because of the fact that he was locked away in Henry's mind, but maybe it has something to do with real Thomas not being alive, which isn't not really possible because somebody made that phone call.
Yeah.
I had that question too, and if you recall, in the final post-credit scene, we see Spirit Thomas with the pocket watch.
Yeah.
But the pocket watch existed in the real world,
It
not the
did
spirit
exist
world.
in the real
So
world.
how does Spirit Thomas get a hold of a watch in spirit world?
Yeah, because
And he make phone calls. Maybe the phone call was actually Spirit Thomas.
maybe, but we also couldn't transfer inventory from spirit world to real world. We had two simultaneous inventories.
Yep.
And so that would make a transfer like that impossible based on the laws that Marianne has to obey. So that's an interesting one.
That's definitely a
Cook,
cliffhanger for a sequel, I think.
that very much could be. Yeah. Cook, do you have any more unanswered questions after playing the game?
I don't know. I was kind of focused on playing the game a lot and being scared. So
We
I
definitely
was,
had an advantage as observers to rummage these things in our mind. I know that you were concentrating on bringing up that shield when the Maws were there, while I was just sitting there watching the movie. So kudos to you for taking the hit and controlling Marianne throughout while we got to sit back and relax and eat some popcorn.
Yeah. You mentioned that you were focused on playing and being scared. So personally, as somebody watching the game, my fear level was 0.8 out of 10. Very, very low. You as someone playing it, did you find it to be a more scary experience?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it was like horror game level. Like I'm scared to play Resident Evil 7, for example, because of
Okay.
how scared I am of that game.
Maybe that should be our next game. Cook
I
plays.
don't
We
know
watch
if I
him
like
play
that
that
Force
one.
force one of us to play it, and then you can enjoy it from the back seat.
That could work, yeah. But it was creepy in spots. I still feel like the scariest thing for me was using that razor blade in the spirit world to cut those meat slab things,
No,
or whatever the fuck they were.
Skin
skin
shields.
doors.
Meat
Yeah.
curtains.
Yeah.
That was
Meat
like the
curtains.
grossest thing. But I think the Maw was pretty. He was pretty creepy, especially, or it was pretty creepy, especially like when you're in the real world and it's invisible and you couldn't see it. So
Yep.
I think that was probably the creepiest part. And then the voices that he would make too were pretty awful. But besides that, I think it was
Yeah.
pretty tame.
Pretty
That
tame.
reminds me of something
More of a thriller than a horror.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That reminds me of a
Agreed.
question that I had that we didn't really get an answer, or not really a question, but I mean, we threw some electricity at the Maw a bunch of times, and I was sort of expecting a climactic electric shock that stops him. But I guess if he has to be part of that end cutscene, then we can't really do that. But that's sort of what I was expecting to happen, and it didn't. But I mean,
Yeah.
that's completely fine. But there wasn't as much Maw in the game as I thought there would be when he was first introduced.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It seemed like Lily was implying that it can't die unless she dies. Because it seemed like none of the electricity stuff would just slow it down. And then and near the end it seemed like the only way to get rid of it was to kill Lily. Or I guess maybe kill Marianne, if that theory holds true for what she was saying.
Yeah, it's a good segue into our thoughts on the ending of the game. Personally, I wish that it had been a little more cut and dry and given us a clear answer instead of leaving it up for interpretation. Um, I I get more enjoyment out of the fact that I have a concrete resolution to the story, and this open-ended ending it wasn't my favorite way to end the game. I'm a little disappointed that that's how it ended, but I understand the artistic reasoning why they would do something like that, and I'm interested to hear what you guys think.
Yeah, no, I'll jump in. I'll have the same general idea about that. I mean, in terms of the creative um, options that they have moving forward for a sequel, it certainly creates a lot more. Well, they can explore. Do they want to go with the Marianne story some more, or are they going to go with Lily, or is Thomas going to be even the main protagonist of the next sequel? We don't know. I mean, the thing is, something like this, they could even go into the past with a prequel, right? Because Thomas had these powers beforehand. What was he using them for?
Yeah,
Or
true.
Marianne had all these powers. I mean, obviously she wasn't killed or anything because of the story, but she was doing a whole bunch of stuff through this medium world for 30 some odd years before we even meet her. But um, certainly a game that you play through for this period of time, it's nice to have a more of a conclusive ending, where like a
Yep.
TV show, if it's a season, you finish the one episode and it's a cliffhanger, you're like, okay, that's fine, but the seasons for the most part end on resolving everything. So
Yep.
yeah, I could go either way, but for the most part, it's nice to have some sort of resolution.
Yep.
Yeah. I agree. I think they left it open for a sequel. I think that's like the biggest reason why they left it as open as they did.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you this, Cook. Would you prioritize playing a sequel if Bloober were to create one? It comes out a year and a half from now. Would you play the sequel?
I would be interested to see what happens, but I don't know if I'd be excited to play it.
Gotcha. Greebs, how about you?
I enjoyed watching it. I mean, there are a number of times throughout the playthrough where I almost called it a movie instead of a game.
Yep.
I think you actually did do that a few times.
So it definitely it's interesting to watch and see everything unfold. I feel like it's a game where there aren't a lot of places to die. It's more of a game where you're just progressing the story, and it is. I mean, especially with all the little items to find being very visible on the screen. It's there weren't a lot of puzzles. There was the one puzzle the water in the water tower area. There were some small sections where you had to avoid the maw, but apart from those, were there a lot of aspects that weren't really just progressing the timeline to
Yeah.
see what was going to happen next?
Yeah, that's a good point. And something that I was thinking about, a way to bring that up is that it really did feel like an interactive movie more than it did a game where you had a lot of combat. Aside from playing hide and seek with the Maw a couple of times and solving a couple puzzles, there really was no conflict that Marianne had to complete to progress through anything. Um, it was mostly just a walk forward story driven game that progressed itself for you.
Yeah, a lot of people call those types of games walking simulators. I don't think it was quite that. Like it was still like there's some gameplay components to it, but I think a big reason why I'm saying I wouldn't be super excited to play it again is because it was not memorable at all in terms of playing. Like you guys pretty much observed what I was feeling during the game is just running around, finding things, like reliving those memories. Like all the stuff that was interesting was related to the story or even like the background and side stories. From a
Yeah,
gameplay perspective, there was nothing really interesting. It seemed like the
yeah.
like splitting between two worlds could have been interesting, but it seemed like it was more of a hindrance just to the recording of these videos more so than actually having some sort of interesting gameplay element to it.
It definitely is
Yeah.
interesting as a mechanic perspective. Sorry, the two worlds, because you're so not used to it that when we got to areas of the game where we needed to use exclusively one of those powers, I mean, it was nice to have observers who would remind you,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that there are these
Go out
other
a body.
powers that you can use, because you just, when you're playing normal video games, you don't consider these as options. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
um,
But like
it,
really like the I don't think they even really needed to do the split world thing. Like the main parts that we're using it for was basically like finding energy in the spirit world to power up like a box in the real world. Like that's nothing really that you would need a spirit world for. I think it was just more of like a stylistic thought and approach that they took with that, because there was like some places like the out of body experience, but really it's because they blocked off a door so you couldn't go through in the real world. You could find a different way to have to get through that door, but I think most of what I saw and what I played, like that spirit world split was pretty much like pointless. There's no reason why it exists from like a gameplay perspective to make it interesting.
I could see how that would be. What's the best way to word this? I understand that opinion, and I want to present a counterpoint to that. In that, the only time that Marianne could actually see the Maw was in the spirit world. The only time that Marianne could relive the memories to piece together the storyline was in the spirit world, and the only time that that Marianne could actually speak and see Sadness, who progressed her through the story, was in the spirit world. I think the spirit world gave Marianne important information that she wouldn't have had the ability to learn without the spirit world being there. So, from a gameplay perspective, strictly, yes, the spirit world wasn't necessarily wasn't specifically necessary, but from a story perspective, it gave us a lot of information that Marianne wouldn't have had the ability to know without having dipped into that spirit world.
Yeah,
so you could probably, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say I agree with that and I see your point, but I feel like they didn't need to do that. Like you
Mm,
could have had sadness appear and disappear without having the spirit world, right? Like you could have had those components without actually having the spirit world. I think it added some depth to like how the story was being told and like how it was being presented. I thought it was cool, but I just don't think it just didn't feel like it was needed from a gameplay perspective at least.
right,
And
right.
I think
I'm gonna
it's
side, I
mostly
think,
gameplay.
I'm gonna side, I think, with Bino in that. I mean, it's a significant part of the story in that there's this lady who can travel to the spirit world and then rescues spirits and sets them free, and then of course there's the Ma who exists mostly in that spirit world, but is starting to creep into the real world. But I feel that maybe if they had done it instead of having this side by side world at the exact same time, there could just be sort of a flash where you're now in one, and then you go through the mirror and now you're exclusively in the other. And then, I mean, number one, you're not loading a computer. I mean, we had some recording issues as a result of the performance that this game was taking, because I mean, it's doing double rendering. And as I mentioned in, I think, the very last video, this game was conceived in 2012, but the computer horsepower just wasn't there, or the console horsepower just wasn't there to support that. But I mean, if you just did these flashes instead from one world and then end scene, cut to the next world, end scene, and you go through a mirror, it really gives you the same effect without having to sort of show off as much as, hey, look at us, we can split screen down the middle and render two different worlds all at the same time.
Yeah, maybe I'm just biased against it because of the recording problems we had.
Well, it is
really fair.
It is fair, and we discussed this prior to bringing this video up, but I think it's worth discussing. Is that was it the recording of the game and streaming it so that we could all make this video together? Did that play a part in the performance issues that we had, or was it simply that this game requires a lot of horsepower? It's not fair for me to stand back here from my seat and say, "Oh, this game's not optimized." But it brings up a good discussion as well.
Yeah, I mean the game played fine when I was actually playing it. It's just more the recording side of things. So I think the GPU was getting used pretty much fully, and then once you start trying to do the recording and encoding the video, then that's kind of where it started to struggle. But it didn't affect the game itself. It was more the recording side of things. So I think the game performed okay. But I also have a 3080, which is like one of the better cards.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Now. So can someone who has a 3-year-old card or a 4-year-old card, what happens if they try to play? They're not recording, but they're playing with an older card. Are they going to run into performance issues? And I know when we were experiencing some of the issues, when we looked at the support site, obviously there are people that are having performance issues with this game. But I mean, one of the advantages is that because it's available through Xbox Game Pass, we were able to enjoy the game through that subscription service, as opposed to like if I'd gone out and paid 80 Canadian dollars for it, then, and it was choppy in some sections, which certainly when we noticed there were mirrors with worlds rendering on the other side of the mirror at the same time, that's where we really noticed it. Then I probably would have had a little bit more of an objection to it. But
yeah,
absolutely. Now that leads into another good talking point, is the Game Pass subscription. I can honestly say that if this game hadn't been available on Game Pass, I probably wouldn't have been interested in giving it a shot. The fact that it was out there, included in a subscription that I was already paying for, gave it the opportunity to be on my radar as a game that I wanted to take part in. And I suspect that it's the same for both of you guys, Cook?
Yep, definitely.
100%.
Game Pass is the best deal in gaming.
It really is. Now, if
jack up the price.
Now that it's done and you've played it, could you say to somebody that doesn't have Game Pass, because this game is available on Steam as well, would you recommend to somebody that they purchase it?
I think it depends on the person, but for general, I would say no, not for $60 at least.
Right. And what was it about that $60 price point? What was it about the game that makes it not worth it in your eyes?
I just think playing it was whatever, nothing like interesting or super exciting. And the story was kind of cool, but I don't think it was like mind-blowingly awesome that it's something that someone needs to play, especially considering how games go on sale so frequently now too. Like it's just kind of that value proposition. I don't see it as like a good buy for someone right now to pay full price.
An immediate comparison that I bring up is a game that I've talked to both of you guys about that I recommend all the time, is What Remains of Edith Finch. That game is 100% a walking simulator. It tells a story. You progress through the storyline based on your actions in the game. You do what the game wants you to do, and you experience the moments that the game wants you to experience. And in my mind, that game is far superior to this one in terms of the emotional touch and the storytelling that the game left me with. And
Yep.
that's not saying that the medium is a bad game at all, but in comparison to Edith Finch, which is a less costly game, it's being given away for free with most of these subscription services, and even on Steam, I think it's only $20 or $30 in comparison to the full price that this game comes out in. That in my mind is a better example of the medium in terms of a storytelling device than this specific game. So that's something that I wanted to mention.
I think
as
you
well.
hit one of the words that I wanted to bring up, and I forgot to bring it up, which is emotional. And that
Right.
this game really didn't create any emotional strings for me. I don't know if it's because I wasn't playing it. Maybe Cook, you can speak to your side of things, but I wasn't emotionally attached to these characters.
Mhm.
Marianne seemed pretty
Blah.
blasé. Like I
Yep.
wasn't really excited. I wasn't cheering her on. I mean, maybe she just didn't like. I mean, she's looking for her sister. Her sister, she thought maybe was dead. Didn't even know she had one. She found out her dad. She had this adopted parents, but she didn't really convey the emotional. Uh, she wasn't tugging at my heartstrings or anything. It didn't
Yeah.
do anything for me. Maybe the final cutscene, kind of just where she finally meets her. But I mean, you're 8 hours into this drama, and only there you're getting a little bit of a, hey, wait a second, here's my sister, and she wants me to kill her all of a sudden, and it's kind of
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that's one thing where, although the story, I think the idea of the story was good because it didn't have any emotional connections associated with it. It just wasn't able to make it to that next level.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think the depth for the characters just wasn't there. It just wasn't developed enough, I guess. And I didn't feel any different than you did actually playing the
Yep.
game.
Yep. If we were to pick your favorite moment from the game, Greeps, what stands out to you as the moment where you're like, I remember that. That was cool.
The mirror and the clock, I think those are two, like, so I like I like puzzles within games. And
Yes.
there was one scene where you had to take a clock and you had to wind it, and at a certain point you'd see the fissure open up, and then you could go through the fissure and see a different point in time. Whereas if you went back and wound the clock to an alternate time, you would again open up the fissure and be able to see that same room in a different point. That puzzle, along with the puzzle with the dollhouse and the mirror, where you had to move the mirror within the dollhouse to enter different points of the house. Those stood out only because, again, this is an opportunity where it had to make you stop, make you think, make you do some sort of action, and it wasn't really walking you, holding your hand through it. So that is sort of my
Yeah.
go-to there.
I think that clock part was probably the coolest gameplay moment in the game, and they only did it once. But I think that was like one of the most interesting things to solve and figure out and kind of just work through that. I think that was the neatest part from a gameplay side.
Yeah, I 100% agree. The puzzle factor and the split world utilization to solve those puzzles was brilliant. That was my most enjoyable part to watch and experience and guide you and say, hey, try this, try that. Those types of things were the most enjoyable for me as well. And I wish that there were more of them in the game. That would have given this game a better final opinion in my mind. So, but on the whole, I enjoyed it. I gave this game a 3.5 out of 5. It did what I wanted it to do. It told a story. It was enjoyable for me to watch, but it left me wanting a little bit more.
Was that half
Cook,
One of
star
the
how about
for
you?
was that half star for the bet that you won?
Yeah.
Ah,
No, the half star was that 3 felt a little too low and 7 felt a little too high. I had to go right in the middle because I know Team Bloober put in a lot of work to make this game, and in the end, I left wanting just a little bit more.
one of the wow moment, not wow, but one of the wait a second, what is that moments? Sorry, going back to the question about moments in the game, was I remember when all of a sudden Jack's tie and Jack's tie clip appeared.
Oh yeah.
And we were all like, hey, whoa, that's weird. But there's literally no explanation as to how that can
Yeah.
happen. Like it's a
Yes.
little
Follow
bit
up at
too
all.
much. It's like it was thrown in there as a, hey, we're gonna make you like, whoa, this was in someone's coffin, like across the country or wherever it is, and now all of a sudden it appears here and it has some significance. But it didn't really have a purpose, didn't have a reason why it was there or how it got there or who put it there or how they like it was just it was almost like it was just planted as a, hey, we're going to make people's minds trip with this. So it didn't have the follow through I think that it needed on some of those
Yep.
Yeah.
moments. Like when you find out more about the mom and the sister and stuff like that, those moments just weren't capitalized on to really keep people going on with it. So
Yep.
that would have been
That's a
one of my
good point.
moments, but it wasn't.
Yeah. Out of 5, what do you give the game?
I'm in the 3 out of 5 group. It had a good story. The idea between the two worlds running simultaneously was nice conceptually. It struggled a little bit in executing it. I feel they could have gone, like you mentioned, a lot further in taking advantages of puzzles associated with that. There was certainly a lot of repetition in terms of, okay, find the little glowy thing and use that as a shield to get through the moths. Find the little glowy thing, use it as a shield to get through the moths. Um, and again, with the characters and their emotions, it just didn't sell me enough on trying to get from the beginning of the game to the end of the game. Now, visuals were great. The characters looked pretty good. I felt at the beginning the size of the hands was a little bit weird, but otherwise, I mean, the faces looked really good. The forest looked good. So visuals was really good, but it's just it was like it was trying, but just couldn't get that last little bit to be a complete game that I was looking for. So I give it a 3 out of 5.
And Cook, what about you?
Yeah, I think I'm 3 out of 5 as well. I think a lot of it was just fine. I think that's kind of for me like a 3 out of 5 is close enough to average. It was fine to play. It wasn't like exciting. It wasn't boring. I never really got bored, but I think part of that is because we played it together and were able to split it up into pretty good chunks. I think playing it together was made it for a way better experience than playing it on its own. I don't know if I actually would have finished this on my own. Like there was nothing that kept drawing me back over and over and over again. It was never captured me from the beginning, but I think it was a good experience to go through it and kind of see the full story because it like again it was fine, but it was like a good fine. It was interesting enough, and I'm happy I played it, and I'm happy I played it with you two. And I think from that perspective, it was a good experience. So 3 out of 5.
Thinking back to that specific point that you bring up, that you may not have completed it because there was nothing really drawing you. I think back at the end of all of our episodes, we all said the story's really interesting. I wonder what's going to happen next. And it was never, I can't wait to play this.
Yeah.
It was, I can't wait to learn what's the reason for this. And so, yeah, very story driven. Not much there for gameplay, but again, it was fine. You phrased it perfectly.
Yep.
I think it's a really good one last try intro game to have gone through.
Yep.
And I think it's sort of just paving the way for more one last try playthroughs. And we'll have to wait and see what comes next.
I guess
from
that angle, I'll never forget this game because it's the first one that we played together.
Yeah, and it brings up a good question as well for our audience in that what did you think of the way that we presented this? Is there something that we can do differently to make this more cohesive, more enjoyable from a viewer's perspective? What is it about the way that we did this that worked? And what can we do better for the next game that we decide to do during this format? So we got a lot of stuff coming down the pipeline, a lot of good ideas to continue pumping out content and videos, and we look forward to sharing all that with you.
Definitely some excitement in our conversations about making sure we get you guys some good content and make it as enjoyable as possible. So stay tuned.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for watching the video and for sticking with us through this playthrough. If you enjoyed this and want to keep going, please consider subscribing and hitting that like button. Really helps us out. And we can't wait to bring you more content. Cook, do you want to sign us off?
Yeah, I mean, you pretty much said it.
You just did.
as good
I
as,
just did.
as I could say it. So signing off, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.